Yeah, I am Brett Bursey. I'm the executive director of the South Carolina Progressive Network. It's a 26-year-old social justice and civic engagement organization that Representative Cobb Hunter and Joe Neal, after their '92 election, helped form as we watched gerrymandering diminish the capacity of the citizens to be able to affect the laws and policies of South Carolina. I don't feel comfortable calling us a nonpartisan organization anymore. George Washington warned us about political parties. Paraphrasing him, he said, if you start them, you're going to end up with two that fight amongst themselves for money and power and forget their mission. And I'm afraid that's where we are now, because the lines that are being considered by this committee and by the legislature are for the benefit of the incumbents and the parties. And that is actually undeniable by anybody that's been watching the process for the last 30 or 40 years, that we now have amongst the nation's least competitive elections with an average of 70% of the 174 seats in the General Assembly being uncontested by any type of major opposition. We now have, the percentages are on the little handout there, that we're running now 5.7% competitive if you use it, the people winning by less than 55%. And the only two people on our panel today that won by that less than that is Representative Hennigan and Representative Bamberg, who lives in one of the most competitive districts in South Carolina. He won by 51%. And Representative Murphy and Representative Collins and Representative Newton won between 95 and 98%. And the rest of the representatives on this panel won in the mid-60s. And that gives a diminution in terms of participation when people don't see competition between ideas and policies. And that's what we've done by making these safe seats that started in a big way in 1994. And what was spoken of earlier in terms of having majority-minority districts has been essentially part of the death knell that this body has gotten away with in decreasing the effectiveness of votes of color. By putting more black people in a district than they need to be in there to be able to see that a candidate that they supported would win, you're reducing the effectiveness of those votes, diluting the value of those votes. We ran a number and came up with something that is interesting, that all of you who studied South Carolina history would remember perhaps that in the original Constitution, the South Carolina delegation had a hand in the 3/5 compromise to be able to count enslaved people as 3/5 of a vote. Well, if you add up all the people of color and weigh it against the black vote and the white vote, the effectiveness of black votes in South Carolina today is 3/5. Not enough has changed. And I'm here not to try and convince you to make a bad system better. My colleagues in the League of Women Voters and the NAACP and the Legal Defense Fund and the ACLU, they are working hard to get the best deal they can out of what you're going to do. What I want to do today is challenge you to have an opportunity to recognize we cannot continue this way. With most of you being elected in primaries, you know as well as I do, or better than I do, that you have a block of constituents that accept no compromise. It's rare when more than 20% of the voters turn out in a primary. You split that in half, and the Democrats get some, the Republicans get some. This tiny fraction of both parties' most strident people are the ones that are driving the train here. And if the incumbent's concern is drawing lines to get reelected, that's what's setting the stage. The maps that we want to submit, our maps were drawn by that group that Ms. Teague referred to, Dave's maps. And I have good advice from attorneys that argue in the Supreme Court that Dave does a pretty good job, and some states are accepting these. We don't anticipate you adopting our maps. We have a map here that's bigger that you may be able to see better. But these maps reflect what you could do. These maps don't pretend to be something that you would actually draw, but what we're trying to do is to get the consideration of competition being the vitality of democracy. If you had competitive districts, you would have to have people that run in a competitive district. To win, they would have to represent people that don't think and look just like them. That's what democracy should look like. With the average of most of our legislators winning with no opposition, they don't have to compromise. And so what we have here, these maps, indicate what we have now in the House. We have 80 safe Republican seats, 9 competitive seats, 35 Democratic seats that are safe, and that adds up to your 124 seats. Now taking just, and again, I want a little footnote here, what you're doing is incredibly difficult. It's very difficult to draw maps to have an outcome that is allowed in the House rules. There's certainly there are no laws in South Carolina. We're the only state in the nation with no laws governing what you're doing today. You have House rules that allow you to draw maps to protect incumbency. And so if you were to overlook that and inject competition into it, you could create as many as, you would create as many as 45 competitive seats as opposed to 9. You'd still have 17 safe Democratic seats, and there would be an opportunity for the creation within the General Assembly or within the House of Representatives for a common sense middle that wouldn't fear losing their seat if they stood up for something we all need: adequate education, pave the roads, adequate health care. They're things that most people want. And we further know, because of a study that we paid the university $3,500 to do as a PhD program, and this is be available through your online service that Ms. Dean will have. This is a state survey that the university did for us in 2017. And it interviewed people in every county, nearly 900 people, and the results of their study, the bottom line was that 64.5% of everyone, and these people have self-identified as Republican or Democrat or Independent, 64.5% said, you shouldn't draw the lines. Your constituents don't want you drawing the lines. At some point, that drum will continue to be beaten and you will lose. You can take an opportunity to get in front of that and look at the amendment that Representative Cobb Hunter has introduced. It's in session now, that you'll be seeing. It was filed last year. We haven't had a hearing on it. But it's a resolution, a joint resolution for you to put a Citizens Redistricting Commission on the general election ballot and let your constituents decide whether you should draw the lines or they get to draw the lines. And I challenge you to defend you continue to draw the lines. The Republicans, 59.5% think that you shouldn't draw the lines. Democrats, 65.8%. So that's the extent of my lecture today. I don't expect you to adopt our maps, but I do expect you to respect what I'm pointing out is a dead end street, folks. Fewer and fewer people are voting because it doesn't do any good. It doesn't do any good because the decisions are made by fewer and fewer of you. And so I would entertain any questions, but would certainly hope that you would consider what we said and read the submissions that we made.
No, thank you for your testimony.
I want to, Mr. Chairman, just briefly, I don't want to belabor this. And I'm someone who in prior sessions has supported and more of a bipartisan redistricting commission type situation. But I have noticed, and this just for thought for later, I have noticed that the commission states around the country haven't turned out as maybe as anticipated. They often deadlocked. They brought the same political considerations into it. So that's just something to think about as we go forward, not from this redistricting, but in future redistrictings.
Well, I would encourage you to look at the legislation that we presented. We worked with people that drew the Citizens Redistricting Commission in 2010. It's got its problems. We do too. And that we worked with the people to draw this plan up. We started in 2017. It was introduced in 2018. You have both the legislative act that would implement it, and you have a joint resolution that this body would put on the ballot to let the citizens decide. We also have an option that you can't stop and the courts can't stop, which is utilizing the statutory ability of citizens in your county to pass a resolution and ordinance in your county saying that your constituents demand to be able to vote on it. That's statutory. It doesn't make you do it, but it's going to be continuing to put the pressure on you. If you want to remain an incumbent, you're going to have to convince your constituents that you should draw the lines instead of them. I think I'm on the winning side on this, ultimately. You may remember this state's never passed the Equal Rights Amendment. I hope it doesn't take as long to straighten out our problems with the electoral system as it has for rights for women. So I agree with you, there's difficulties in all systems. I think the one that we've designed took some of those into account. Democracy is what? It's not the worst, it's not, yeah. Any other questions?
I think, well, Mr. Collins, he's going to be our last question because we're into the 3 o'clock hour, and I know everyone would like a break, so you'll get the final question.
Real quickly, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this. As with a political science degree, I'm fascinated in.
Mr. Collins, I'm hard of hearing. If you could speak up a little bit.
Thank you for this map and these ideas. As a political science major, I'm fascinated with these ideas. I come from, even in your map, the dark red areas.